We are live streaming.
Good afternoon, members of the State Board, the staff from the Department of Education, members of the public. I want to welcome you to meeting of the Education, Transformation, and Finance Committee meeting. We have two items on the agenda today. We have a recommendation from the department to recommend to the State Board approval of the CCR policy. So that's an action. And then we also have an update on the mid-session FY26 discussions that are taking place in Annapolis. Again, want to thank everyone for joining us. This discussion of the CCR standard is incredibly important. I think we made a lot of progress over the past few months, and I think I want to thank the department for working on this issue. This is not an easy issue to get your arms around, to be able to figure out all of the moving pieces, the connections with the math policy and everything else, and trying to get everything aligned and be able to say it in a way that not just education experts would know, but parents and students could pick this up and understand exactly where we're going. And the goal again is that in the state of Maryland, our goal is to have our children graduate high school ready for life, whether they choose to go to college or whether they want to go directly into work. When they leave us, they are set up for success for life. So we're working towards that. We appreciate all the hard work of everyone that's gotten us to this point. At this time, I'd like to turn to our board president, Dr. Michael. Did you want to have any opening comments or anything before we get started, sir?
No, thank you for offering, but no need for additional comments. You've done an excellent job of framing this out. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reese, I'll turn to you. I know the superintendent had an earlier conflict and she'll be joining us as soon as she can. So I'm going to turn to you to introduce the MSDE team and to kick off the presentation.
Absolutely. President Emeritus Crawford, would you like to begin with the CCR item or the mid-session update?
Let's do the, are you ready to do the mid-session update?
Mr. Crawford, this is Krishna Tulur. We were slotted
Yes,
for
second.
this item at 5 o'clock. So Donna
We'll do
is
it at
wrapping
5.
up something else.
No, we'll do it at 5. We'll do it at
Thank
5.
you.
We'll stay right with the agenda.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Then I'm going to kick it over to Mr. Phil Lasser to get us started on the CCR policy.
Good to see you, sir.
Great. Thank you. Good to see you as well. Thank you, Chair Crawford. I am also here with Richard Kincaid, who is our Senior Executive Director of College and Career Pathways. And if everyone can see my screen, I believe, we will get started. Great. So thank you. So Chair Crawford, members of the board, we are here today to discuss the CCR standard, and we are recommending or requesting a recommendation for adoption of a revised CCR standard as well. So we have the presentation and a attached policy document that goes into more detail of our request. So before we get into that, I want to take a second to again just go back to why we are here, how we got here. And so looking back at the blueprint legislation, what the statute says, what the context is that the statute, part of the blueprint says that we require a new CCR, College Career Readiness Standard, to be set that allows students to graduate and to succeed in entry-level credit-bearing college courses. And the goal is that students are able to meet this by the end of their 10th grade year and no later than graduation. And then the blueprint then goes on to direct the state board to adopt a CCR standard, really define what are the specific metrics that convey that students have the skills and knowledge in ELA and math to succeed in those credit-bearing courses. And then going on, meeting the CCR standard enables students to be prepared for a post-CCR pathway. Those are AP, IB, dual enrollment, early college, career and technical education courses, as well as enrolling in credit-bearing college courses in Maryland community colleges. So it gives that option there too. I do also want to clarify while we're here that the CCR standard at this point is not required to graduate from high school. Students do not need to do that, and this does not affect the graduation requirement. Those are separate. So to go back a little bit of history, just so we remember where we are. Again, the blueprint legislation sets the initial standard of how to define students that are ready as basically meeting the proficiency threshold on the state assessments in English and math. And so in February 2022, the state board adopted this interim standard, which adds a little bit more detail to that and sets it that the students meet the CCR standard if they score these at or above these benchmarks on the English 10 MCAP and the math MCAPs or that score on the math SAT. So again, the interim standard is passing one of those or getting the proficiency benchmarks on the English assessment and a math assessment. At that point, after 2022, we partnered out with the American Institutes for Research. We conducted our empirical research study looking at what other methods could students use to meet the CCR standard? What are those metrics? Could be looking for that research recommendation for how to revise the CCR standard so that students are accurately identified. And so based on that recommendation, in January 2024, the state board adopted this CCR standard that basically still includes, at the bottom, option 2, still includes students scoring proficient or above on English and algebra MCAP assessments. And then also added option 1, where students can meet the CCR standard by showing academic success and math mastery. Academic success is earning a high school GPA of 3.0 or higher, and math mastery through earning a grade of A, B, or C in Algebra 1, or scoring proficient or above on the Algebra 1 MCAP. And so this is the CCR standard that is in effect right now that the board adopted last year. And so looking through this, we also wanted to share some data of how the expanded CCR standard that was adopted last year, what the impact was on the number of students that met the CCR standard. So what you'll see here is that on the left bar there, the blue one, that is school year 22-23. So where only the interim standard was in effect. And we had 21.1% of our students, grades 10 through 12, 21% of students met the CCR standard through meeting the assessment proficiency benchmarks. Then if you look at the column on the right, what this is 23-24, so last year, and it shows the number of students that met the CCR standard under the new standard that was adopted last year. And so in total, we have 49% of our students that met the CCR standard. So more than double than the year before. And also just how to read this chart. So again, on the right, the blue bar is the students that met the CCR standard by only through the interim standard. So the assessments. The orange section is the students that met the benchmarks in both the interim standard and the new standard through the GPA options. So basically that orange bar can be compared directly to the blue bar to the left of number of students who met the interim standard benchmark. So it's about the same year to year. And then the green section is the new students who are identified by the new CCR standard, mostly through that GPA option. So an additional 27% of students were identified as meeting the CCR standard through that through the new option in 23-24. And that's how we get to 49% total. So to break that down a little bit more, this is again school year 23-24 last year, looking at the percent of students that met the CCR standard, broken down by race and ethnicity subgroups. And so again, you'll see that there's a significant increase in the number of students that met the CCR standard across all of the different race and ethnicity groups. But as one thing of note that I want to call out here is that while the total height of each of these bars is very different from each other, if you look at just the green sections, those sections are fairly similar to each other across the different race and ethnicity groups. And so that really shows that those groups are meeting the CCR standard at approximately the same rate across each group, having the same performance there. And one more data slide here. This again looks at the percent of students meeting the CCR standard by student service group. So looking at students with disabilities, students without disabilities, economically disadvantaged students, non-economically disadvantaged students, multilingual and non-multilingual. So again, you'll see that green bars significantly increase the percent of students that met the CCR standard. And they really have a very significant effect for students in those service groups. If you look at economically disadvantaged in the middle there, the third bar, what we see is that 8.5%, the 1.0 plus 7.5, 8.5% of students would have met the standard only under just the interim through the assessments. But with the expanded option, an additional 21% met the CCR standard, so a total of 29% of economically disadvantaged students met it, going from 8 to 29. So significant increase for students there. All right, so taking it back again to talk through context of the benefits of meeting the CCR standard. And most of this is directly from the Blueprint legislation. So what the Blueprint says is that students who meet the CCR standard are entitled to enroll in credit-bearing courses at Maryland community colleges or other open enrollment public institutions of higher education. So those colleges adhere to the CCR standard that the state board is setting. If a student meets it, they are enrolled in credit-bearing courses. Additionally, students who meet the CCR standard are provided with access to post-CCR pathways at no cost to the student or the student's family. And the third bullet here, this comes from the joint implementation policy that the state board passed with AIB. And so this says that students who meet the CCR standard are entitled to the LEA covering the cost of 2 dual enrollment courses per fall and spring semester per student. And so additionally, the policy said that the students can enroll in additional courses, LEAs can choose to cover additional courses, but at this point, LEAs are required to cover at least 2 dual enrollment courses per semester. Jumping over to benefits for students who have not yet met the CCR standard. And so what the Blueprint legislation says is that students who have not yet met the CCR standard still shall have initial access to post-CCR pathways. So again, post-CCR pathways are those AP, IB, dual enrollment CTE courses. And so what this is that students are not fully blocked out from those initial courses, so they still have a chance to meet the CCR standard. So right now, students who have not yet met the CCR standard still have initial access to post-CCR pathways. But then the Blueprint goes on to say that when the AIB determines that Blueprint has been fully implemented, which we don't expect to be before 2027, exact details on that are up to the AIB. But once AIB determines Blueprint has been fully implemented, then the post-CCR pathways are available only to students who have met the CCR standard. So that's there. And then our third bullet here, defining initial access. So everything above has been basically directly from Blueprint legislation. The definition here of initial access, this is a new definition that's included in the attached CCR standard policy document. So this has not been defined before, but this will, setting this definition based on board's approval, will help create consistency of experience for students across the state. So what we're proposing to define initial access is the first 2 courses of a CTE program of study, the first 2 courses of an AP or IB program, or up to 2 dual enrollment or dual credit courses as well. So again, so that definition is new, that we're asking for approval of. The rest of it is context that is basically direct quotes from legislation. And with that, I will turn over to my colleague, Richard Kincaid, to talk about CCR supports.
Got it. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Chair Crawford and President Michael and other members of the board. One of the things that weighs heavy on us as educators through this process is we want to make sure that all of our students are well supported, especially those students that have not yet met the CCR standard by the end of their 10th grade year. And so as you are aware, starting in school year 23-24, students that are in the 11th and 12th grade that haven't yet met the standard are supposed to be provided with an appropriate level of support to assure that they are able to meet the standard as soon as possible. And so a couple of call outs have already been made over the last few months and year, specifically students having the right to retake a course that they haven't earned a C or higher in, and students having the right to reattempt an assessment that they haven't yet scored proficient in. Additionally, starting in school year 23-24, students in any grade and up to and including 10th grade who are not on track to meet the standard by the end of 10th grade shall be provided with appropriate CCR supports to assist the student in meeting the standard as soon as possible. And so as a department, much of this you all have been briefed on developing the guidelines around our multi-tiered system of support. So MTSS becomes critical to working with students as early as kindergarten and then to and through 10th grade to ensure that they are on track to meeting the standard. But also you'll recall that for 11th and 12th graders, there was the development of both inclusion guides and also CCR support guides that provide high quality strategies by content area to assist in not just allowing a student to simply retake a course, but making sure that they have proper supports as they are retaking that course so that they're not just repeating the same material, but they have every opportunity to be successful. And MSD continues to refine what that looks like so that LEAs are well supported in that journey. Next slide, please, Phil. And then through the process of thinking through the new math pathways, we want to make sure that the recommendations of the Maryland Launch Task Force with their draft PK-12 mathematics policy are also clearly incorporated. And so beginning with the graduating class of 2030-31, so Ninja Math, right? Students in 9th grade or below in school year 27-28 would be the ones directly impacted by this. The math mastery option of the CCR standard should be updated to define math mastery as one of the following achievements, and there are 3. So first, earning a final course grade of A, B, or C in both Integrated Algebra 1 and Integrated Algebra 2, or scoring proficient or above on the Integrated Algebra statewide assessment, or earning a final course grade of A, B, or C in an advanced mathematics pathway course in which integrated algebra is a prerequisite. Next slide, please. And so several design priorities that the MSDE team grounded the work in from the beginning as we were rethinking additional options for the CCR standard. And so as hopefully that comes back up, those 4 priorities first is to prioritize equitable opportunities for all students, regardless of their situation. And then second, ensuring that all options to meet the CCR standard are equally rigorous. So making sure we have that comparability between the original CCR standard that must be met by the end of 10th. As we build in additional options for students to show mastery of those things, we want to make sure there's comparability between them. Third, avoiding opportunities that circumvent the intent of the policy. So not watering down the process at all, but finding additional ways that students can show their knowledge and thrive within the system. And then fourth, to ensure alignment with other statewide improvement efforts, including the Accountability and Assessment Task Force and the standards revision processes. And so as these became our 4 grounding components, we began looking at a myriad of options that could exist for a student to show that they have met a CCR standard that is applicable for the state of Maryland. From that, we have 9 recommended additions, which the next slide will begin detailing for you. So with the approval and adoption by the State Board of Education, we would ask that starting in school year 25-26, in addition to the currently adopted criteria, students may meet the CCR standard by achieving one of the following options below. So the first option is to earn a 1-year core content GPA of 3.0 or higher in their 11th or their 12th grade year. So the way that we would calculate this, it wouldn't be cumulative of previous years. It would be standalone, so that 11th or 12th grade year is siloed and only includes courses completed in the areas of ELA, math, science, social studies, and CTE that were taken within that year. Other elective courses would not be included in that calculation. The second component, so B, would earning a grade of C or better, unless otherwise specified by dual enrollment agreements, in at least 2 core content dual enrollment or dual credit courses at any point in the student's high school career. So remember back to the definition that Phil talked about earlier, you could potentially take as an entry-level option 2 dual enrollment or dual credit courses, and they could meet this CCR standard. Next slide, please. The third is to meet a performance threshold of at least 2 AP or IB courses. So from our advanced academics team, at any point during the student's high school career, and at least one of those courses must be a math course. For AP assessments, that means scoring a 3 or higher would be required. For IB diploma program assessments, that would mean scoring a 4 or higher as a minimum. Next, meeting the college and career readiness benchmarks on the SAT or the ACT. So defined, what that means is that on the SAT, we would need students to earn a score of at least 480 on the reading and writing section and a score of at least 530 on the mathematics section. For the ACT, we would need to see an 18 on the English section and a score of at least 22 on the mathematics section. Again, recall that each one of these we're working on comparability of what proficient means on these individualized assessments. Next, obtaining a score of at target on both the math and the English language arts dynamic learning maps alternative assessment. This would be for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities who are already participating in the alternative framework. Next slide. Next, earning a silver or better on the ACT WorkKeys National Career Readiness Certificate. This is one of the options that percolated up during that initial AIR study, and it's one that the team recognized several states are additionally using to measure a CCR for their students. Silver or better gets us to that proficiency level. Next, earning a state-approved, industry-recognized credential that's aligned with a CTE and/or a comprehensive arts pathway. H would be completing the high school level of a registered apprenticeship program. And then lastly, an item that was added via our public comment period, a student earning a score of at least 50 on the ASVAB. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a little bit about that public comment period. The proposed draft CCR standard policy document was shared with LEA superintendents via transmittal, chief academic officers over multiple virtual and face-to-face meetings, career and technical education leaders, and others across the state. During a meeting with our LEA chief academic officers in February, the document was reviewed and discussed, and all of their feedback documented. The document was also posted on MSD's website with a public invitation to complete a feedback survey. If you'd like to go and see what that looked like, there's a link for you there. In all, we received 269 responses, which were submitted to that survey. And respondents included a large variety of our stakeholders and customers, including parents, students, teachers, principals, LEA staff, higher education community members, and also members of our business and industry community. Next slide, please. And this was the breakdown of their feedback for the items that are reflected in our recommendations to you. So between 64 and 92% of the respondents supported the inclusion of the proposed CCR criteria that was presented to you just a few minutes ago. And you can see their level of agreed or strongly agree for each one of those options of whether they wanted it to be included in the final policy. Couple of summary items from public comment, and so categorizing the feedback into domains. First, we saw strong support for multiple pathways to CCR. That included a variety of options, included work-based learning, apprenticeships, and non-traditional assessments, with some of the feedback saying this provides an opportunity for all of our students to see themselves in the process. The top suggested new additions would be a nod towards world language proficiency, the ASVAB, portfolio work-based learning. The most frequently mentioned issue was expanding or modifying the GPA criteria. So for example, 1 year versus a cumulative GPA, eligible courses, unweighted GPA versus weighted, and then the impact on a student taking rigorous courses. An implementation challenge that was a theme throughout was having clearer timelines and guidance on criteria for inclusion as CCR as an indicator. Clearer differentiation between college and career readiness, ensuring that students pursuing careers outside of traditional college pathways are well supported was something that was a nod. And then equity across the board, these concerns remain a priority, specifically regarding our multilingual students, our ML students, our special education students, and then access disparities in different districts across the state continues to present a number of issues, related to some of the criteria that have been listed. Next slide, please, and then I'll hand it back over to Phil.
Thank you, Richard. So I want to now coming back to our proposal in the policy document. Our proposal again is that this would go into effect in school year 25-26, so this coming fall. And basically what that means is that a student has that 1 year 11th grade GPA of 3.5 in school year 25-26. They would be recognized as meeting the CCR standard in summer of 2026 once we collect all the data, run the numbers, and they have access to the benefits starting in school year 26-27. So that would be the first cycle of when this would go into effect. And then also want to reinforce again that what the policy says is that the current CCR standard the option 1, option 2, but the GPA, the current standard would stay in effect in perpetuity. We are not suggesting a sunset of that at all. And then lastly, again, as described earlier, that the math mastery component definition would be revised based on what we talked about earlier. Math mastery component would be revised starting with the graduating class of 2030-2031, which is students who enter grade 9 in 27-28. And before wrap up as well, want to again just go back to we have a quick simulation of what the impact of some of these proposed CCR options would be for students. So this looks at school year 23-24 data and looks at how many additional students would have met the CCR standard if it were in place. So these are hypothetical numbers looking backwards. And so what we see here are we looked at the students who met the performance threshold on 2 AP or IB assessments, as well as the students who met the CCR benchmarks on SAT or ACT. So on the left bar here, what these are, the blue section is students who met the performance threshold on AP or IB and met the current CCR standard that was adopted in 2024. So those students met both. The green sections are the students who did not meet the 2024 CCR standard, the current one, but did meet the new proposed options. So these green section are the new students who would additionally have been included if this were in effect. So we have 692 students, additional students who would be recognized through the new CCR standard. On the right, 2,759 additional students would have been recognized as meeting the CCR standard through SAT or ACT, but did not the current one. So again, so this is a quick look back at just a couple of the options, but wanted to give the scale of what this could be. So again, wrapping up, MSD is requesting that the state board adopt the proposed CCR standard as described in the attached policy document. It would go into effect starting school year 25-26. And again, the current 2024 standard would remain in place. That does not have an expiration date. And before we wrap up, just have everything here in one page to summarize the current CCR standard on the left and our additional proposed options on the right. And with that, we will turn over for any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. We appreciate this. Thank you very much. Again, thank the department for a great job in being able to conceptualize and then communicate this in a way that makes sense. I was very happy to hear as we look at these additional options that we are looking at them from a comparability. So we're not watering down the standards, we're not lowering the standards. So that was important for the public to hear. If you would take down the presentation at this time, the floor is now open for comments and questions from board members. Please, let me see here. We have Dr. Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. I got a list of things. Do you want me to kind of go one at a time? How do you want me to go with it?
Let's do a couple at a time, and then we'll see. Give the other board members an opportunity, and then we'll. Dr. Michael, if you would do the first 2 or 3, then we'll go to Ms. Medina.
Perfect. All right. Just want to thank staff. There are a number of changes that have been made in this last revision, just highlighting the clarity on the alternative measures and just really how we're framing that out, the additions to the definitions, adding ASVAB, adjusting the alternative assessment measure. Just thank you for those additions. One thing I'd like to lift for us to look at and consider, maybe if we could pull up, I'm looking in our alternatives list, Mr. Lasser, at our standard for dual enrollment courses and advanced place and the advanced assessment courses. In dual enrollment, we say a math course and a core content course must be eligible. And in the advanced assessments, we say at least a math course and one other. I'm just wondering, and it's really a question, whether we should get those tight and aligned, whether they should have the same kind of boundaries on that, or whether it makes sense to keep those different. So I wanted to pose that as a question. So essentially, if we look at 5C, we have earn a grade of C or better in the dual enrollment courses. And these are core content, one must be math. And then down below it in C, we widen that out, the criteria for AP or IB, to where it's one must be math and the other can be anything. Is there a reason these are slightly different, or is this an opportunity for future alignment? I welcome your comments on this.
Thank you for that. Yes, so I think this is a opportunity where we could, add in that extra alignment. I think each of these came from different conversations and, were put together in different ways. And we wanted to make sure that we were elevating those math courses in each of those. And it, also included the ELA Science or Social Studies for the dual enrollment one. But, I think this is an opportunity where we could parallel the language a little bit more.
Okay. On that note, I would offer in the responsibility section that MSDE, one of the responsibilities for MSDE to provide a specified list of what qualifies on the criteria. So we've bounded the criteria here, and I think MSDE should provide the list of eligible AP exams and criteria for dual enrollment courses, and we should expressly list that as a responsibility of MSDE.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, I'll do one more and then I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Crawford. I want to look at the GPA here. I really, so yeah, right there. I really like this in principle, this notion that a student, we see so many students who, may struggle in their freshman or sophomore year, but get with the program by their junior year. In fact, many universities will preference that GPA and they'll look at a positive trend as a reason to support a student. So I'm really supportive of this approach. I am wondering, there are some slight differences here between how we bound the GPA in the junior year. That is, we're looking at the core courses, so ELA, Math, Science, Social Studies, and CTE versus all courses. And we also don't tag a math requirement here. Just wondering if this is another one where there's some rationale that we should build in, or if there might be some opportunity for alignment with the GPA pathway in the central standard.
Could be room for alignment here. I think some of the thought process behind why this was specified as only core content, whereas the cumulative GPA that's described earlier under the current standard, because the cumulative one goes over multiple years, we would have students who basically, incorporating all of the courses that are required for graduation, having that full, well-rounded input into what their GPA is. With the one-year GPA, there was a concern that you could have some students who maybe take a less rigorous, 1 year in efforts of trying to boost their GPA for that year, and maybe you take the graduation requirements a different year. Sort of possibilities to game the system. So that was the thought there of including just the core content classes there. Of course, we hope that doesn't happen. We'll encourage that to not happen across the board, but that was the thought of why that is included as is.
Okay. All right, I think we should sit with this and kind of and touch back again. You know, if we go back to the original CCR study and some of the other national pieces, you know, it's that standard can drop to about a 2.8 on core course in terms of success in community college. Um, Maybe there's another way to slice it. I wouldn't want to. I feel like what we're doing a little bit here is changing the rules mid-game, even though it's an alternative measure. The way we're counting GPA changes, and look, if we're getting students in their junior year that have above a 3.0 that didn't before, I think we should support that. I will note that we don't have a math element here, and I think we should figure that out. Maybe add in that they need to have gotten the A, B, or C in the algebra course, or an A, B, or C in a math course in that junior year. I think we're close on this. I think this is a really important measure. So maybe let's take some of this back and see what our best thinking is coming forward. Thank you, Chair Crawford.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now recognize Ms. Medina and then Mr. Greer.
Thank you so much, Chair Crawford. And actually, I was right in line with President Michael. Just wanted to kind of make sure that we were expressly or explicitly kind of listing out those requirements coming from MSD, because I already imagine, you know, the school counseling community being inundated with the specific questions of what test, what class, what this, and we just don't want to leave that up for interpretation. We want to make sure that things are very clearly outlined. So that was all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Greer?
Hey, y'all. Appreciate it. Just lowering my hand. So just two quick questions. One, can we just affirm, I just want to ask the question in public here. This policy does not change graduation requirements, right?
Correct. This does not change graduation requirements, and meeting the CCR standard is not required to graduate.
Correct. Great. Okay. That's just making sure, just confirming, and I want everybody to understand that fully. The next question is, can we please just clarify do ESOL, English as a second language classes, do they count as ELA credits?
I'll need to check into that further. I believe they do not count. I don't know if anyone else here has more on that, but we can look into that and get back to you. But I believe they do not count for ELA credits.
Okay. Yeah, let us know. That would be helpful. I've heard a couple of questions about whether or not ESL classes are considered ELA, like if they actually count as the credit. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Greer. Dr. Michael, did you have additional questions, comments?
I do. We got some excellent feedback from our partners at the AIB. One of the points that I'd like to draw us to is in the purpose section. Maybe if you can pull that up, Mr. Lasser. Great. One of the points that they brought in as I read this, this is a very factual account of the purpose. It cites the law. You know, it's a very specific kind of recount. I think there's an opportunity here for us to really build out the purpose of the purpose of the CCR standard itself, and the intent. You know, when we read about the CCR standard, you know, in how the blueprint is described, there's talk of the kind of this global standard that certifies students that have met required literacy and mathematics competencies. I think that could help the public just understand in more simple terms in this first paragraph or two. It's in there in some way with the quotation, but just in some more plain words about what the purpose is of the CCR standard.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. The other piece, and this is more something that if we go down to CCR supports. And the last section on 3. Says CCR 3. So I'd like to see us, and I don't think it all belongs in this policy. But I think the board is, I know that I am, and many of us in conversations, are really interested to know what the supports and early indicators are going to be to help understand students that are not on track by 10th grade. So 2 comments. One, this is something that I know that our districts and the public are really going to benefit from in guidance. And so just wanting to signal that we need to be more robust in terms of what we're providing out of MSDE to do that proactive work, right? We know that the best preparation here is strong tier 1 instruction, but what happens when students aren't? I'm wondering if there might be a bit more of a framework that could be built out in this section without building the entire early warning indicator system in this policy.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. We can definitely take that back to the team and see what we can put together for that.
All right. All right, Mr. Crawford, I think that's it for me. Just want to reiterate, I think we've come an exceptionally long way since when we first adopted the CCR standard. What was that, a year and a half ago?
Yes.
And just this level of policy and detail is what the ecosystem asked for. And just appreciate how far we've come and the way that the staff has really been thoughtful in incorporating feedback from stakeholders, and feeling really good about where we are with this, even with some minor tweaks as we head into the meeting.
Excellent, excellent. Just one thing, one of the things that we talked about around the supports and what happens to children that do not meet the CCR standard. One of the things, really appreciate what you've done in terms of building out the support section, because we didn't want, we're trying to minimize the unintended consequence of a child not meeting CCR standard and then saying, why am I even bothering to come? One of the things, again, we just ask you to continue to monitor. It's great that they will still have access to courses. They have to pay for courses, though. Is to, again, just monitor behavior, make sure that we're looking at this, and in particular, looking at the potential unintended consequences of not being CCR ready. And as you gather data, please keep the board advised in the event that we may need to come back and revisit some of this in the future. Great. Are there any other questions or comments concerning the CCR standard?
Mr. Crawford, I have one more inspired by
yes.
your comments. I am wondering if we might make explicit in the MSDE and state board responsibilities that we examine, that we disaggregate data on a regular basis in terms of students' success with the CCR standard, and make that reporting, much like we did in literacy, a responsibility of MSDE and of the state board, and just make that explicit in our responsibility section.
Excellent suggestion. Any other suggestions or comments from the board? We have before us a request from the state superintendent that our committee favorably vote out the CCR standard with a recommendation to the full board for adoption. At this time, we're going to take a vote of our committee members. Committee members, all in favor of advancing this CCR standard with a recommendation for approval by the full board, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Do we have? Okay. And those opposed? Those abstain. So it looks like it passed unanimously. Very nicely done, guys. Very nicely done. We've made a lot of progress over the past period of time. Thank you. At this time, Mr. Tulor, Ms. Gunning, if you are ready, I guess we would go to the update on the budget.
Absolutely, Mr. Crawford. Ms. Gunning has prepared the update, and she will go over the content with the committee. Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay, how do I share screen? There we go. Okay. Okay, hopefully everybody can see this. This presentation today is a mid-year update on the budget through the legislative session. We're halfway through the session. So we're going to talk about legislation this year, the Excellence in Maryland Public Schools Act, and then the supplemental budget that was just released by the governor last week. So from a legislation standpoint, we review legislation for a fiscal impact, and we work closely with DLS on what we call fiscal estimates. And so of the more than 200 pieces of legislation, 25% have a potential fiscal impact. And we say potential because we're not sure yet what's going to pass and what isn't. The fiscal impact ranges from something really small, like staffing a work group or providing data to another agency, all the way to establishing a pre-kindergarten 529-esque plan, or another piece of legislation asks the department to review all AI tools in classrooms in the state and prepare a list of best practices. And included in all of those are 8 early childhood and child care bills, 6 curricular bills, 4 for students with disabilities and discipline safety, and 3 IT bills. Okay, so we're going to talk about what's new in the fiscal 26 budget. So the governor released the Excellence in Maryland Public Schools Act, which is a monumental piece of legislation that recoups savings from programs that are being implemented too fast when folks aren't ready really to do to implement as intended with fidelity. So the intention is that this would pause implementation phases and either slow them down or pause them for several years, which obviously would result in savings. And then those savings will be repurposed for a number of things. One of which is a grow your own component that focuses on current professional assistants, so they're non-certificated staff that work in classrooms across the state. We have more than 6,000 conditionally certified teachers, so the focus would be to get them certified and then to build with the non-certificated professionals. The landmark piece of this legislation is the Academic Excellence Fund. I'm gonna move to here. Okay, so in the Academic Excellence Program, there's a fund, and the savings from the slowdown of the phase-in is included in that Academic Excellence Fund. The purpose of this fund is to implement proven processes, policies, and strategies to in reading and math for all students, all schools, all districts in the state, to ensure that we are able to meet the board's goal of being in the top 10 on what they call America's Report Card, or the NAEP exams. With that comes a number of new positions. Right now, obviously this legislation is in deliberation right now. The House has moved it to the Senate, and so the House has made a number of changes, and then it'll go to the Senate, and then we'll see what actually comes out of the legislation. But we are really hopeful that this program is going to make it through the session. Okay, so I started to talk about additional positions. So back in January, we talked about the 18 new positions that were in the governor's allowance, and 10 of those are the reading and math coaches to start that work, not associated with academic excellence. And then as part of that work to identify new positions that we needed, we took a deep dive into our long-term vacant positions, regular positions, and vacant contractual positions to determine what could be repurposed or realigned to meet the position needs of the department. And so we were able to realign 22 contractual positions and 5 regular pins to bring, and these are in the governor's supplemental bill, to bring in an additional, we think it's 17 positions. We're still trying to make the math work, but to bring in an additional 7 positions. Some of those include like accessibility specialists, education investigators that, you know, will go out and do the investigation of an accusation against a teacher or something with childcare, all part of our, you know, requirements to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. Those in that group of positions, there are 2, I lost the word, went right out of my head, apprentice coordinators, so that we can help high school students. You guys just heard about CCR, so I think that will be very helpful. And there are additional operation support positions in there. Okay, so that's all that I have right now. Is there something you all wanted to ask questions, talk about? All right, sure.
The floor is now open for, thank you very much, Ms. Gunning, for the update. The floor is now open for any questions. Again, we're still in the process. Can you characterize at a very high level, you said that the bill passed the House. Were there any changes coming out of the House bill? Highlight any major changes that they're proposing?
Yeah, so it's interesting what they did. They took away a lot of the savings and left quite a bit of the new expenditures. So I'm fairly certain that the Senate will have to take some serious action on it. In order for it to work, we need the savings to pay for the new initiatives.
Okay. Very good. Any questions or comments concerning the mid-session update of our budget. Yeah, and want to just thank the department for the hard work around the CCR standards and our finance team. This is a very busy time with the legislative session going forward. So I want to thank the superintendent and the team for all of the work in supporting us. If there are no additional comments or questions, we can adjourn early, or we can just sit here and look at each other for about 8 or 9 minutes. I think we want to adjourn early. Okay, nicely done, everyone. Let's take a vote of the board members. Those in favor of adjourning, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain. Again, thank you so much. Appreciate all the hard work. Appreciate it. Have a great evening.
Take care, everyone.
You.